domestic issues of abortion and other things, that it is a real challenge to learn and to know and even to compare. We both, there is God and He.
I would like to introduce you to Robert Berman. He is the founder and director of HODES, which is the Halachic, which means Jewish Law, Organ Donor Society. He's going to talk about the issues of organ donors according to Judaism. And Mr. Berman is a graduate of Harvard University, of Baruch College in New York, and Yeshiva University. He has been a social activist and a freelance journalist, and he's been published in New York Magazine, the Jerusalem Post, the Jewish Week, Moment Magazine, and Jerusalem Report. Robert Berman.
Thank you very much for the invite, the Christian Caucus, Josh, Judith, and everyone else who made this event possible. I'd like to first offer a couple of disclaimers. My name is Robby Berman, and it is spelled R-O-B-B-Y. It is not spelled R-A-B-B-I. There's enough of those in this town, and if you need to get a ruling on Jewish law, you probably should go to one of them. Also, my sum total of medical knowledge comes from watching 4 consecutive seasons of ER. So if there are any doctors in the audience, you'll forgive me for any gross anatomy mistakes. I was working as a journalist in Israel. I lived in New York, grew up in New York, and after graduating Yeshiva University, I moved to Israel, became a citizen, joined the Israeli Defense Forces. I was injured, had a couple of ribs removed, and then I became a journalist here in Israel. While writing a piece about organ donation, I discovered a very disturbing fact that made me decide I didn't want to finish the piece. It made me decide that I wanted to go out there, leave journalism, and change the reality, and change the end of the story. The fact was that 100 Israelis every year were dying needlessly. When I say needlessly, I say that because when a person dies from cancer, they die because God has not shared with man the cure for that particular cancer. But when a person dies from organ failure, that is a needless death because God has shared with man how to cure organ failure, and the cure is called organ transplantation. And the only and sole reason why people die from organ failure is because other people don't donate the spare parts to make it possible. But the wisdom is with us. And so given that 6,500 Americans die every year needlessly, and 100 Israelis die every year needlessly, and as the sun goes down today, 17 more families will be mourning in America needlessly, all because of mistaken perceptions about their religion and their faith. And every religion and every faith and every culture has their own inhibitions that make them feel uncomfortable with organ donation. I felt as an Orthodox Jew that I wanted to learn about my tradition, what the Bible says, understand it, crystallize it, and share it with my community. And so what I'd like to do here today is share with you those 4 inhibitions that inhibit Jews from donating organs to the point of the absurd. I'll just give you an example of how deeply rooted this taboo is. When I first started the Halachic Organ Donor Society, the acronym is HODS.org, HODS.org is our website, I went to a man in New York, a young Jewish, very successful businessman who was very philanthropic. He wasn't Orthodox, wasn't religious. He studied Torah with the rabbi once a month, but other than that, he was not observant at all. And it was known that if you went to him, went in his door and you were a charitable organization, he'd give you a check for $10,000 to start a charity. You could be Jewish, not Jewish, right-wing, left-wing. He didn't really care. I know some people are already saying, hey, can I get his name and number afterwards? Well, I went to him during his lunch break. And I don't know if you know this, but Jews, Orthodox Jews, don't mix milk and meat. If you walk into the home of an Orthodox Jew, there's separate cabinets, even for the dishes, of milk and meat dishes that might touch milk or meat. So I went in during his lunch break to tell him what the Halachic Organ Donor Society was about, that we want to break that taboo and show Jews that organ donation is permitted by halakha, by Jewish law. And while I was speaking with him, he happened to be eating a cheeseburger from McDonald's. And I, as an Orthodox Jew, had never seen a cheeseburger up close. And I noticed there was a little piece of cheese and meat hanging on his lip. And I had to resist this urge to lean over and separate that piece of cheese from the meat. And after my presentation was over, the man said to me, you know, I really don't think I could support your organization. I said, why not? You support every other organization that walks in your door. He says, that's true. I do. But I don't want to support an organization that might be doing something that's against Jewish law. I said, excuse me for saying so, but I don't think Jewish law supports eating a cheeseburger either. He said, it's true, I don't live my life according to Jewish law, but when I die, I want to be religious. And when you think about it, many people that you know, whether Christian or Jewish, may not live their life as a religious Jew or Christian, but when it comes to death, in the Jewish faith, we tear kriya, we tear the clothing, we sit shiva, we sit mourning, we say kaddish in synagogue, we start going to synagogue, we say psalms, we give charity, we start doing things and becoming a little bit more observant. What is the source of this taboo in Jewish law? And the answer is Seth. That's the mnemonic, S-E-T-H. I don't go in order. Each letter stands for another word. E stands for emotions. Emotions, what I mean by that is, a lot of people, I believe, because I've been called to the hospital numerous times to discuss Jewish law with families, I believe sometimes family use religion as an excuse not to donate organs because they find it difficult to donate emotionally. And I don't think anyone should be forced with the concept to donate organs. I will say, however, that in Jewish law, we are often asked to do things which are difficult emotionally, physically, and financially because it is the right thing to do. And so if we are truly religious, we have to, yes, be concerned with our own emotional well-being, but we also need to be concerned with the emotional well-being of the family in the room next to you in the hospital where their 7-year-old son has a chance to live and your 50-year-old father doesn't. The second letter is H, stands for halakha. Judith already told you what halakha means. Does anyone know? Anyone remember? You got the prompt, Jewish law. Halakha means Jewish law. There are 3 prohibitions in the Bible concerning Jewish law, concerning a cadaver. 3 prohibitions in the Bible concerning a cadaver. 2 of them are clearly biblical. 1 of them, there's a debate whether it's biblical or rabbinic. I'm not going to get into the debate now. For our purposes, let's say they're all biblical. And they are the following. Well, let me ask, there are some people here, both from the Jewish faith and the Christian faith. Can anyone tell me what the 3 biblical prohibitions are concerning a cadaver? What can you not do with a human body on a biblical level? You can't cut into a cadaver. You cannot get benefit from a cadaver. And you cannot delay burial of a cadaver. Those are 3 clear prohibitions. How is it that I, as an Orthodox Jew who believes in the Bible, could stand up here with a yarmulke, with a skull cap in my head and say that Jewish law supports organ donation when clearly they involve cutting into a cadaver, getting benefit from a cadaver, and delaying burial of a cadaver for at least a few hours, if not a day? And the answer is the following. All Orthodox Jews are required to eat pork on Yom Kippur if it can save a life. Because in the hierarchy of values in Judaism, saving a life is more important than just about every other prohibition. So not only are we allowed to violate certain commandments in the Bible, we are obligated to violate certain commandments in the Bible. So anyone who tells you that Jews can't donate organs because of these 3 prohibitions clearly do not understand the Torah. It's clear in the biblical and rabbinic law that saving a life is more important than just about everything else. The 3rd letter, which deals with the inhibitions concerning Jews and organ donation, is S. S stands for superstitions. In all of our faiths, we like to think that our faiths are clearly from Jesus or from Moses, and there are no superstitions in the faith. Well, I'm a little bit of a rationalist as well as being a religious person, and I kind of feel like, you know, when you do the research, you'll find out there are many things we believe in that are not well sourced, and most likely are superstitions. I'd like to deal with 2 of them this afternoon as they deal with organ donation. The first one, the first superstition, has to do with the belief in Judaism of resurrection of the dead. There is a belief that in some shape or form people will be resurrected. It's not clear how, when, or who, but the belief does exist. And I went to yeshiva all my life, and I was told by my rabbi that Jews are not allowed to donate organs. Why? Because we need to be buried with our organs in order to be resurrected from the dead. And if we don't have our organs, we can't be resurrected. Well, that's a nice belief. There's just a few problems with that belief. Number 1, if you do the research, whether with your thumb in a book or on a computer, there is no source for that belief. Not in the Bible, not in the prophets, not in the Hagiographa, not in the Mishnah, not in the Talmud, not in the Shulchan Aruch, not in the Talmud, nowhere. There is no source for it. There's one rabbi in Jerusalem alive today who says that, and there's only two possibilities where he got it from. Either he made it up, or he has a direct source from Moses and Mount Sinai that no one else seems to have. But there is no source for it. In addition to which, it's counterintuitive because your organs disintegrate in the ground. Anyone know where in the Bible there is a story in the valley of a resurrection of the dead of a few people? Where? Ezekiel 37. And what's that story called? Exactly. It's called the resurrection of the dry bones of Ezekiel. It's not called the resurrection of the dry bones of the pancreas and the liver. It's just called the resurrection of the dry bones. And why is that? Because all you have left is dry bones. Exactly. So to say that you need your organs in order to be resurrected is ridiculous. I mean, people were in car accidents, people were incinerated in the Holocaust, people were blown up in tanks. They don't have their organs. If God is going to resurrect people, he has to give you new organs. In fact, take it a step further. It would be quite funny if God were to resurrect us with the same organs that we were buried with, because the reason why we died in the first place was because our organs failed. So if God resurrects us with the same organs, we'll probably die about 10 seconds later because then the organs fail again. You need to be given new organs. The second superstition has to do with signing an organ donor card. I'm really not sure how much this plays a part in the Christian faith. But in the Jewish faith, there's something called liftoch et hapeh Satan, to open the mouth to Satan, to beckon fate, or the ayin hara, the evil eye. And people don't like to get an organ donor card because they're afraid by signing an organ donor card, you're saying, if I, Robby Berman, should die, I want to donate my organs. And if any of you here have seen one of Woody Allen's movies, he says, I forget which movie it was, but he said something like, my Aunt Becky died of cancer. And he whispers it because he's afraid if he says it out loud, somehow he might actually get the cancer. And that's the concept of the ayin hara, that if you actually say something out loud or sign a document, you might actually cause it to befall you. Now, if you look clearly in the Torah sources in the Jewish faith, it does talk about the evil eye, but it also talks about the good eye, and in context, it's clearly talking about human beings. You shouldn't do something that will cause someone to look at you with a bad eye that will cause you harm. It's talking about jealousy. It's not talking about a humongous, invisible, evil eyeball rolling down the street coming to get you because you signed an organ donor card. In fact, if the evil eye really worked, I wouldn't be here today trying to convince people to get organ donor cards because there wouldn't be a dearth of donors. The evil eye would have caused harm to all the people who have signed organ donor cards, and the problem is nothing bad is happening to them. That's why we need to sign more people up. So that's the second superstition. What are we left with? What was the mnemonic that we had to remember these four inhibitions? Seth. We covered E, which stood for emotions, and H stood for, and halacha means Jewish law. And what were the three prohibitions in Jewish law concerning a cadaver? Well, there was a lot of mumbling, but I'll give that to you. And what does S stand for? And what were the two superstitions? Superstitions that what? Evil eye, and that you need your organs to be resurrected, right? So what we're left with is really a critical point in Judaism, and that's T. That stands for timing. Timing means, as we all know, I'm making an assumption that people know, that you can either donate a kidney when you're alive, half your liver when you're alive, a part of your lung when you're alive, but most of your organs, the critical organs, you have to donate as a cadaver when you're dead, a deceased donation. The question remains, when are you dead? And I know this sounds like a bizarre question. Well, what do you mean, when are you dead? Because 100 years ago, this question was nonsensical. If you got whacked in the back of your head, brain damage, and you couldn't breathe, and you couldn't get the oxygen, your heart's a very powerful muscle, doesn't get oxygen, it stops, and you're dead in about 3 minutes. There's no question about when are you dead and when are you alive. Today, however, we have an invention called the ventilator. And the ventilator is a great machine and a horrible machine. Because if the ventilator helps a person who's alive remain alive and recover, that's great. But if a ventilator is hooked up to someone who's dead, and again, we haven't defined yet what death is, and all it's doing is forcing compressed air in and out of lungs and keeping organs viable, but the person's dead, his soul has left the body, then that's a horrible thing because that person, according to Jewish law, needs to be buried. Now, none of us have a device that can measure when the soul leaves the body. Jewish law, however, does debate when the moment of death occurs. And what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes explaining to you what brainstem death means. Brainstem death is not coma. I'd like to give you, if you will, a 20-second anatomy lesson. Here it is. This is the brainstem. It's connected to the spinal cord. And the brainstem does a lot of great things. The most important thing is, right now everyone's doing it, and you're not conscious of it. You're not controlling it, and you're not directing your diaphragm to do it, but everyone is going like this. And no one had to think to do that, because your brainstem's doing it for you automatically. If your brainstem didn't work, you would not breathe. On top of the brainstem is the cortex, a larger part of the brain, and that's the end of the anatomy lesson. When a person doesn't have a working cortex, you're in a coma. You could lie down in the bed for 10 years and one day have a tingling sensation and wake up. Jewish law does not say that a person in coma is dead. Israeli law does not say a person who is in a coma is dead. Christian law, American law, no one says that a person in a coma is dead, because returning back to consciousness, the person has the ability and therefore is alive. What about brainstem death? Brainstem death means the following. Watch closely. Cortex does not work. The brainstem does not work. And immediately upon not working, the brain undergoes a process called lysis. Lysis means when, I'm sorry for using such graphic terms, when the cells begin to liquefy and the brain becomes a liquid. It's irreversible, it cannot be reconstituted, and immediately upon onset of brainstem death, it is irreversible. No one in the history of the world has ever woken up from brainstem death. Let me just repeat that, because I've read a couple of very interesting articles in newspapers which border on fiction. No one in the history of the world has ever woken up from brainstem death. It is irreversible. Now, if the brainstem is dead and you can't breathe, if you guys are joggers, you know when you jog, you have to get a lot of oxygen. And the heart is a very powerful muscle. How is it that when the brainstem is dead, how is it the heart continues to pump for another few days? Where does it get the oxygen from? I'll keep on pumping until someone answers. Where does a person get the oxygen from to keep the heart pumping? The brainstem is gone, can't breathe on his own. Exactly, the ventilator is venting his lungs. How long, if a person's on a ventilator, how long can you keep the heart pumping for? Just a few days, maybe a few weeks. And then it's over. Inevitably, there's complete systemic failure. And here's the question. In this gray area, this dusk, or this twilight, is that person considered dead or alive according to Jewish law and according to Christian law? In other words, in the Jewish faith, there is a debate in the Talmud Yoma about whether you need to check a person's breathing or a person's heartbeat to determine whether or not they're dead. Because we all agree that if a rabbi thinks that a person is dead when the brain begins to dissolve and the soul has left the body, you would all agree that rabbi would allow you to recover all of the organs, even the heart, because the person is dead according to Jewish law. But what about the rabbi who thinks, when he looks at the sources in the Talmud, that as long as that heart is pumping, it does not matter. That person is considered alive. Would that rabbi allow you to recover organs or not? He wouldn't. Why not? What are you doing to the donor if you remove his organs at this point? You're killing the donor, exactly. And therefore the rabbis would not allow it. And there is a legitimate debate in Jewish law on this issue. My understanding of Christianity is that the majority of Christians accept brainstem death as death according to their faith. If there are other people in the audience who know of otherwise, I'd like to hear from them. What I've done, and then I'm going to open up the floor to some questions or pass it on, what I've done with the Halachic Organ Donor Society in the last 4.5 years is I went around trying to speak with rabbis and impress upon them how important it was to get organ donor cards. And again, this taboo that Jews don't donate organs, that the body is inviolate, is just not true. Saving lives is of utmost importance in Judaism. So 4.5 years ago when I started the Halachic Organ Donor Society, HODS.org, there were 3 rabbis in the world that had organ donor cards. And today we have over 120 rabbis who have organ donor cards around the world, most of them with beards and black hats. Now it is true I did Photoshop some of the beards onto the rabbis. No, they're all authentic. So I go around lecturing in different parts of the world. I think this is an incredible opportunity. You know, there's so many things that divide people. But saving a life, I just gave a lecture to the Koret fellows here in the Knesset 2 hours ago. And Mahmoud, the Palestinian, came over to me and he said, you know, in the Muslim faith, there's a phrase which says that if you save one person, it's as if you save the world. And I said, you know, that's funny, Mahmoud. I said, because I think the Jews stole that phrase from you because we have the same thing in our faith. And I'm sure in the Christian faith there's something similar to that as well. And there's so many things that can divide us. Saving lives and supporting organ donation is something that can incredibly unite us. So I extend my hand in friendship to anyone of any faith, specifically to Christians, and say, hey, let's look at the sources, let's look at the Bible, let's look how much God puts importance in saving other human beings. Let's join hands, let's see what we can do to start a campaign in our community and say that we are working together to save people's lives. Thank you very much. Does Jewish law distinguish between the recipient, sex and gender, age not? We're not going to be apologetic to Jewish law. I'll be very honest with you. The Talmud, which was written about 2,500 years ago, does make a distinguish between saving the life of a Jew and a non-Jew. You have to understand, though, that the non-Jew of yesteryear, the non-Jew that the Talmud was talking about, was the non-Jew of a pagan that worshipped the god of Molech, that sacrificed his first son on a pyre of wood. The non-Jew of today, it could be monotheistic, could be ethical, and the distinction that's made then should not be made today. And that's the majority of the rabbis, all of the rabbis that I showed you, including the chief rabbi of Efrat, including the chief rabbi of Haifa, including the chief rabbi of Poland, including the chief rabbi, yada, 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 all of them agreed that you should donate organs to Jew or non-Jew alike because we're all created in the image of God.
One more question, please.
It does say in the Bible that a life is in the blood. It does say that a life is in the heart. It even says a life is in the nose, meaning breath. It says the wisdom in Mishlei and Proverbs is in the kidneys. A lot of this stuff is allegorical. I don't think it's really understood to be interpreted literally. And as we grow, and I don't think the soul is a physical thing that you can say it resides in something at all. I don't think it's something within our comprehension of where or what it is. The terms of where is the soul is a paradox right there within the question itself. I just want to end by saying that my father, Arnie Berman from Woodmere, New York, always likes to say, he quotes the book of Deuteronomy, where God says to the Jewish people, he says, "V'natati lefanecha hayom hachayim va'amavet." I have put before you today the choice between life and death. And God commands the people, "Ubacharta b'chayim." You should choose life. I ask everyone here, concerning an organ donor card, when you no longer have the choice to choose life for yourself, please choose life for someone else. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in July.
Now, if we want to get a shema going, we got to...